Okay, so I just wanted to follow on from where we left off, just to go through some of the caveats or a few things to warn you about before jumping in with this rig. Now, as you've seen throughout the series, it upholds pretty well. It does a really good job, but the main issues I'm having are with efficiency, which I'll get to towards the end of this episode. But as you can see, we've got nicely locked links, which basically basically show that the wheel cages are in the right positions as shown before. But I really went to town with this one. Keyframed every single possible position with as much precision as possible. A bit of a tongue twister there, but yeah, as you can see, if there were a problem, surely it would amplify as you get further down the chain of carriages. But so far, everything looks to be nicely locked in place. So quality isn't the issue. Again, the issue is efficiency. Now, the first point is something which you should be aware of already. Unique data is required for each unique carriage and gap, which is what we did in the previous episode. We recorded data for 16.3 centimeters, which was used for the carriage length, and then we recorded data for 8 centimeters, which was used for the gaps between the carriages and for the length of the smaller carriages at one point. Now, if you've got a chain of carriages and they're all of different unique lengths, you're going to need to record data for each unique carriage length or each unique gap between those carriages as well. So bear that in mind because it will easily add up. So if you've taken like 20 minutes to record one set of data and you've got 10 sets of data, and now you've got another 180 minutes to work with, and that may impact what you had in mind. So moving on to the next point, changing the spline requires all data to be re-recorded. Now that's a biggie. You want to make sure that you've got your main spline set and that's that, and everything's signed off in regards to that, because if you change the size of the spline, or if you change the curves in it, which would in turn change the size of the spline by default, if you change the curves and lengths and everything in the spline, all the data that you've got plotted will be incorrect, basically. So, if you've got this back point here, and then all of a sudden there's a new curve in this part of the spline, the front position will likely need to be redone, basically, and then that would knock onto everything else as well. So, yeah, simply put, if you change the main spline, you need to redo all the data you've gathered for it, for every single carriage. Now, the third point, you can't reverse the point sequence of the spline. Now, this is the one which caught me, because I thought, the train and carriages can move forwards, and it works fine, and they can be reversed, and it works fine. So surely, if I just reverse the spline, it'd just be the same as just swapping the carriages around and moving along the same spline, because the spline's the same and everything, so why would it change? Well, I'll explain, because if you've got this back wheel cage here, and you've got the front wheel cage offsetting relative to that, and at the moment we're on a straight here, so this front wheel cage probably won't move much relative to the back wheel cage. Now, if we were to reverse the sequence of the spline so everything was flipped round, and we got this back wheel cage back into this position on the spline, the front wheel cage would be somewhere around here, it'd be mirrored across, so it'd be somewhere around here. As you can see here, we've got data recorded for the front wheel cage to be offset based on this straight length of track, so it won't move much. However, if we've reversed the sequence of points on the spline and the front wheel cage is over here, you can see there's a clear bend here which should require the front wheel cage to be offset in some way, but instead it's got data saying you don't need to be offset because we're on a straight, and obviously that's wrong, it's not in the straight, so you end up with everything going out of sync, and the wheel cages start floating around, the links break, and it all goes to crap basically because all the data you've got is invalid. However, if you did do that, it would be a case of re-recording data for each of the carriages and gaps again for the new orientation of the spline. So bear that in mind. Once you've put it in, once you've got your carriages and splines set up, you've recorded data for it, that's how it's going to be pretty much. Now I did start this with the train facing the wrong way around, and how I addressed this was I basically just swapped the geometry around, just span the geometry around and swap the wheels, and then that was it. And that was a lot easier than having to re-record all that data, so just bear that in mind. Now the first one, the accuracy of data is dependent on the amount of keyframes gathered. Now with that, what I'm trying to say is, it's something I explained in a previous episode, but I'm just covering it again just so you're aware of it. Say you've got this was a data gatherer. You're like, okay, we've got keyframe here, and then keyframe there, keyframe there, keyframe there, and then there. You'd be stepping along this curve, and all the bits in between wouldn't have any keyframes, which means you're relying on Cinema to do the interpolation for you. Now that's not a wise idea, because Cinema doesn't quite know what it's doing. It doesn't know how to interpolate for our purposes anyway. It will do what it can, but not in the way that we'd want it to. So again, what you'd want to do whenever it comes to gathering data for these corners, you want the data gatherer to move really slowly along these corners so you can gather as many samples as you can. I mean, don't go too crazy, but just gather as many as you think you would need for the speed that you'd have trains and carriages moving along it at. Just get as many samples as you can, and then on the straight parts you don't really need the carriage to gather as many samples, So that's something to bear in mind. And then the last part, keyframing 3 sets of data over 400 frames with tight precision took 12 hours. I kid you not, 12 hours of pure physical labour, and it was excruciating both physically and mentally. It was just not enjoyable at all. However, you think once you've done the set of data, you've done it once, you don't need to do it again, and that is true. That was the mentality I had when I started doing it, because I thought, once I've done it, I only need to do it once, and that's that. Don't need to come back. However, with one of the sets of data, I screwed it up because I was out by a centimetre, and I was livid. So what I did wrong was, see here, we've got this front link here. I've got this thing just floating above this back wheel here. So I had it there on purpose, but when I measured this, I measured it from there to the middle of this wheel cage, forgetting that these 2 sets of wheels here are part of one wheel cage. So instead of the connection being from the middle of the wheel cage to the middle of this wheel cage, I had it from the back of this wheel to the middle of this wheel cage. So I was out by a centimetre roughly, which then meant I was a centimetre shorter than I should have been. The problem with that was that I had this link measured specifically to make sure that it didn't pierce this back wheel whenever we went on tight bends, and to make sure that these carriages didn't smash into the back of this train. But yeah, I was reluctant to redo the data again because it took me 4 hours, so I ended up just trimming off the front and back of each of these carriages, which wasn't too bad because the design of these carriages is rather repetitive, so you wouldn't even notice if I chopped the front or back off. However, if I'd made a bespoke carriage, I couldn't just simply chop the front and end of the carriages off. I would have to just redo that data, and the thought of that is horrid. So yeah, you do need to be careful when you're committing to this, because if you're going in with the amount of precision that I did with this one, which was probably unnecessary, but I did want to see how far I could go with this rig, really stress testing it, and I realised this is something which could be a serious issue if you do wrong. So I would treat it, when it comes to the precision or how precise you go with the data gathering with this rig, I'd treat it like how you would treat a smoke or fire or water simulation. You obviously want the smallest voxels possible to get the best detail. However, there does reach a point where your PC just can't handle it, or it takes too long to cache the simulation, or the file sizes for the data gathered is just too large. Think of it like that. You need to get the right balance between precision, where it looks convincing, and doing that with the least amount of effort as possible. And that, I can't tell you the perfect answer for that, because I guess it depends how close you go to the rig and what other factors are depending on it, what sort of other mechanisms rely on that data. But for the most part, like in the spline I used throughout the series, it only took me about 10 to 20 minutes or something to record a set of data, and I probably could have been quicker with that as well. But I started doing this with that in mind, thinking, oh, it won't take too long, but I was wrong. So yeah, just something to bear in mind. It does the job, and if I were asked to do this again with this level of quality, I would just do this again, even though it took 12 hours, just because I don't think I'd be able to achieve it in any other way, at least not with this level of precision, without having some sort of engineering qualification and knowing the formulas to implement, which is actually what I originally tried, and I couldn't get them to work because I'm not an engineer. But anyway, so they're the main caveats that I've found with this. And yeah, if you find any issues with this, let me know, or if you encounter any other errors, let me know, because obviously I'm going to be using this rig as well. So I don't want to be encountering these issues when I could find them out beforehand and address them earlier on. But yeah, if you find any issues, let me know, and I'll try and do an update video on how to fix them if I can fix them. Otherwise, let me know how you get on, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.